What if Bitcoin was never a rebellion against the financial system, but the system's own next stage designed to absorb its imbalances without ever admitting collapse? At first hearing, that sounds far-fetched, even conspiratorial. Yet when you strip away emotion and examine incentives, timing, and outcomes, a subtler logic begins to emerge. Every major financial shift in U.S. history has ultimately reinforced the same center of gravity: the dollar's influence and the state's ability to manage confidence. The U.S. now carries more than $36 trillion in federal debt. Interest payments alone exceed $1.1 trillion per year, overtaking defense spending and rising faster than any other budget item. This is not a temporary strain. Low-rate bonds issued during the 2010s are being refinanced at triple or quadruple the cost, locking in high interest expenses for decades. Debt has become reflexive, compounding upon itself, harder to escape with each rollover. Meanwhile, the dollar keeps losing purchasing power. Over the past century, it has surrendered more than 96% of its value. What cost a dollar in the 1930s now costs more than 25. In just the past 5 years, inflation has quietly erased about 1/4 of real household purchasing power. Savings decay, wages lag, and living standards drift lower, not by decree but by design. So the question becomes unavoidable: how does the U.S. exit a trap it cannot inflate away, cannot tax away, and cannot default on without detonating global finance? The answer may not lie in fixing the old system, but in creating a new one. A mechanism that makes debt less relevant without ever writing it off. Now, look at the chronology. The 2008 financial crisis broke the illusion of stability. Trust in banks, regulators, and monetary authorities collapsed. The Federal Reserve responded with unprecedented liquidity, trillions in quantitative easing. It stabilized markets but permanently rewired expectations. Money could be created at will, and from that moment, the old limits were gone. Inflation's later surge simply confirmed what the public already sensed: fiat credibility had boundaries. Then, only weeks after the crisis peaked, Bitcoin appeared. Its creator, Satoshi Nakamoto, remains unidentified. No verified nationality, no traceable motive. Yet small details are notable. The English in Bitcoin's early writings is idiomatic and fluent. American in tone. Development timestamps align with U.S. East Coast working hours, perhaps coincidence. But when a technology redefines money, it's natural to ask who gains most if it succeeds. For years, Bitcoin was dismissed. Banks ridiculed it. Regulators warned against it. CEOs like Jamie Dimon mocked it publicly. Governments branded it volatile, illicit, irrelevant. Then slowly the tone shifted, not from the margins, but from the center. In 2024, the U.S. approved spot Bitcoin ETFs. Overnight, Bitcoin transformed from outsider to insider. It could now be bought through retirement accounts, traded through Wall Street custodians, and integrated into global portfolios. The largest asset managers, BlackRock, Fidelity, Vanguard, moved in. Liquidity deepened, volatility compressed, Bitcoin was institutionalized. By 2025, even political rhetoric followed. Former President Donald Trump publicly proposed holding Bitcoin in U.S. strategic reserves, a symbolic moment that reframed Bitcoin from protest asset to national asset. And notice the timing. Global adoption accelerated only after U.S. regulatory acceptance. Once Washington gave the green light, the rest of the world followed. Legitimacy first, capital second. Step back and trace the sequence. An anonymous creator. A launch immediately after a global credit collapse. Years of official hostility. Then a controlled opening through U.S. financial institutions. Finally, the prospect of sovereign adoption. The question then isn't who invented Bitcoin. It's who benefits most when Bitcoin becomes a global store of value. Bitcoin doesn't erase U.S. debt, but it does something subtler. It absorbs excess confidence. It offers a new scarcity asset that soaks up liquidity in a world drowning in obligations. As capital migrates into Bitcoin, the real value of legacy debt diminishes quietly. Inflationary energy shifts toward assets instead of goods. The dollar remains the unit of account for Bitcoin markets, preserving global demand for it even as trust in fiat erodes. The system doesn't default, it transforms. From this angle, Bitcoin isn't anti-establishment. It's the perfect release valve. It channels global anxiety into a digital form that the system can still denominate, tax, and regulate. It neutralizes rebellion by giving it rails. So perhaps the real question isn't whether Bitcoin represents freedom. Perhaps it represents the most sophisticated voluntary instrument of control ever devised, one adopted enthusiastically by those convinced they escaped it. History will decide which story is true, but history also reminds us the architects of new systems rarely fight the old one. They design its evolution,